I want to start this episode with something that grief really rarely gets credit for. Grief is one of the most significant identity experiences a person can go through. Not just an emotional experience, not just a painful season, but something that changes who you understand yourself to be at your very core. And because grief almost never gets discussed that way, because what it does to your sense of self is far less talked about than the sadness and the loss, a lot of women go through bereavement and come out the other side wondering why they feel so unfamiliar to themselves, wondering why, even after the sharpest grief has softened, something still does not feel settled. It's because grief does not just take a person from your life, it changes the landscape of who you are. I want to talk about that today, gently, without rushing it. My name is Clare. I'm a positive psychology and nervous system specialist, and this is the Happier Life podcast. I want to name something specific before we go anywhere else. In the early stages of grief, people around you have expectations of what you will feel and how long it will last. There is a rough shape in most people's minds for what grief looks like and a timeline, often unspoken, for how long it is acceptable to be in it. What nobody prepares you for is the identity dimension, the strange, disorientating experience of not quite recognizing yourself, of reaching for how you used to feel in your own skin and not quite finding it, of realizing in quiet moments that the version of yourself who existed before this loss is not quite the same version who exists now. That is not pathology. That is grief doing what grief actually does. Notice what it feels like when you think about who you were before this loss and who you are now. If there is a gap between these two things, you're not imagining it. That gap is real and matters. When someone central to our lives dies, we do not just lose them, we lose the version of ourselves that existed in relationship to them. Who were you as a daughter, as a partner, as a friend to this particular person, as a parent? That role, that relationship, that daily orientation towards someone, it shaped how you moved through the world. It shaped how you made decisions, how you spent your days, what mattered and why. When they are gone, that orientation goes too. And the question of who you are without it is one that grief does not automatically answer. Some find themselves not knowing what to do with time that was used to be organized around someone else, the together activities, not knowing what they want from your days without a particular person in them, not knowing who you are when you are not someone's daughter or someone's partner or someone's closest friend. That disorientation is not a sign that you're not coping. It's a sign that the loss was significant enough to reorganize your identity, which is also a measure of how much the relationship mattered. And the nervous system is deeply involved in this. Your system learned to be in relationship with that person to orient towards them, to feel safe in their presence. Their absence registers in the body as threat, as loss of regulation, as a fundamental wrongness that thought cannot resolve. This is why grief is physical, why it sits in the chest, the throat, the stomach, why it exhausts you in a way that is completely out of proportion to anything you have done that day. I want to sit with a question that does not often get asked in the middle of grief. Not how do I feel, but who am I becoming? Because grief is not just the end of something, it is also, when you move through it properly, the beginning of something, a reconfiguring, a period in which you find out which parts of yourself were genuinely yours and which parts were shaped entirely by the relationship that is now gone. Some women find on the other side of this work that there are parts of themselves they had set aside for years, suppressed or subordinated to the needs of the relationship. They now have room to surface, that there are things they want that they had not given themselves permission to want before. There is a version of themselves waiting on the other side of grief, who is not just bereaved version, but something more whole. That is not a betrayal of the person you lost. It is the most human possible response to a loss that required you to grow. I want to name something gently but honestly. Grief that does not include the identity dimension can get stuck, not because the person grieving is doing it wrong, because the question underneath the loss, who am I now, does not get addressed. And unanswered identity questions do not resolve quietly. They surface in anxiety, in a low-level lostness, in a persistent feeling of not quite fitting your own life. The women who work through this properly, who allow the identity question to be part of what they explore, describe something specific on the other side. They describe feeling at home in themselves again, making decisions from what they want rather than from what the relationship required of them. Knowing sometimes for the first time in a long time what they actually value. Waking up in the morning without their first thought being about the absence of the person they lost. That does not mean the person is forgotten. It means they are integrated, part of who you are rather than a hole in who you are. I want to hold this episode gently because I know this is not easy territory. If you are in grief right now, you do not have to rush this, but if part of you has been quietly wondering why you feel so unfamiliar to yourself, I want you to know that it's not weakness. That is the identity dimension of grief that nobody told you about. You don't have to figure this out alone. A cuppa and a chat is a free conversation with me, a low risk way to find out whether working together is right for you. You can book yours at happiercoach.com/chat. You don't have to decide today, but if something in this episode has connected with you, it's something that you have been carrying, do not ignore that. And I will see you next week. Until then, take care of you.